Foxfeather by Imbolicx. Do you remember the games you played as a child? Running around outside, making up rules, inventing magic where there was none. Maybe not. Maybe that era was already gone by the time you grew up. But I'm sure a few of you, old farts like me, still remember. Those days were magic. We'd stay out past sunset, climbing trees, chasing each other barefoot through the grass, playing whatever games we could dream up on the spot. But there was one we always came back to. It seemed harmless, just another bit of childhood nonsense. But even then, something about it felt different. We called it a game, but after that night, I knew better. Its name was Foxfeather. None of us really remembered who taught us the game. It was just something we did, like it had always been there, passed down from older kids or whispered at sleepovers until it became real. The rules were simple enough. Each of us would bring a pine cone, plucked from the woods behind our homes, and someone would fetch a single feather. Back then, nearly every backyard had a few chickens or ducks pecking around, and feathers were as easy to find as pebbles. Finally, at dusk, we'd all meet at a place we called Holdra's Rest, a clearing just past the creek. There, we'd place our pine cones in a circle and set the feather in the center. Then we'd leave, returning only in the next day. If one of the pine cones was missing, the owner of that pine cone had to return that night, alone, to Holdra's nest and bring the feather back. It might have sounded simple, even silly, but the thought of walking into those woods alone after dark chilled us in ways we couldn't always explain. Maybe it was the stories, the ones whispered just before bed, about the Holdra and the children who vanished without a sound. Or maybe it was just the trees themselves. At night, they felt alive in a way that pressed against your spine, like they were listening. Every time we returned to check the pine cones, we stood in silence, breath held, thinking the same thing. Please don't let it be mine. I remember that day like it just happened. My little sister, Ruth, stood over the circle, staring at the space where her pine cone should have been. Her face went pale, blank, like all the color had drained out at once. Around her, the others exhaled in unison, relieved it wasn't their turn. A few laughed, too hard. Someone muttered a story about the Holdra and her appetite for the youngest. It was all part of the ritual, teasing, joking, pushing just enough to scare the unlucky one. Ruth, however, didn't laugh. She didn't even move. She simply stared at the empty space. The rest of the afternoon unfolded like any other. The boys threw stones at tree trunks and dared each other to climb the tallest branches. Someone started a game of tag, half-hearted and lazy in the heat. There was laughter, chasing, the usual roughhousing of children killing time before dinner. All except Ruth. She stood apart from the noise, leaning against a crooked tree with her arms folded tight across her chest, eyes fixed on the woods. She didn't speak, didn't laugh, didn't move unless startled. As the sun slipped lower, the lights shifted, the way it does in late summer, turning the grass long and gold. And with each passing minute, her stillness grew more intense. I glanced at her now and then. Her face had gone pale. She wasn't blinking much. And when someone brushed past her or shouted too close, she flinched like she'd been stung. By the time the first shadows started to stretch out from the trees, she looked like she might be sick. Then, just before the sun dipped beneath the hills, she came to me without a word and grabbed my arm. Her fingers were like ice, her grip tight, and I felt a shiver crawl up the side of my neck the moment she touched me. "I don't want to go," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I looked at her. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "It's just a game," I said. "It'll be fine, we've all done it." That wasn't true. My name had never come up. "But I'll get lost," she whispered, tears pooling. "It's so dark." I sighed. "It's the rules." "Come with me," she whispered, her fingers latching onto my arm with more strength than I expected. Her nails bit into my skin as if she were clinging to the edge of a cliff. I didn't want to go. God, I didn't. The thought of those woods after dark made my stomach knot. The stories we told, silly little things in daylight, suddenly felt like warnings we'd been too stupid to understand. "I can't," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The rules say you have to go alone." "Just to the creek," she begged. "You can watch from there, please." I hesitated, glancing at the blackness between the trees. They were just stories, I told myself, nothing more. I nodded. Ruth let out a shaky breath like she'd just dropped a boulder from her back. "You can't go with her," one of the boys shouted from behind us. "She's gotta go in alone," another chimed in. "I'm only going to the creek," I shouted back. "The rules say Holdra's Rest, not the woods." They grumbled, but I stood my ground. Eventually, they let it go. I grabbed Ruth's hand, and together we stepped into the trees while the others taunted us from behind. The creek wasn't far, barely a 5-minute walk in daylight, but now, under the weight of shadows, it felt endless. We moved slow, carefully placing each step. We didn't speak. My throat was tight, like something had knotted it shut. The forest creaked and murmured around us, never still. Distant branches cracked like dry bones, some far beyond the tree line, others much too close, just beyond sight. The deeper we went, the more the air felt wrong, heavy with something I couldn't name. Cold gathered in the hollow of my spine, and every step sent a fresh wave of goosebumps across my skin. I couldn't shake the sense that we weren't alone, that something moved with us, just out of sync, just out of reach, watching from the dark with eyes I couldn't see. I imagined it lunging out from the dark, dragging me into the underbrush, ripping me into where no one would find the pieces. Finally, the sound of running water reached us, soft, steady. I exhaled, but it came out shallow. "There," I whispered. Ruth flinched like I'd slapped her. "I don't want to go any further," she said, pulling up short at the edge of the creek. "You have to," I said, but my voice cracked. "No," she whimpered. "The Holdra lives there. There's no such thing." A hoot rang out above us, loud, abrupt, and far too close. It cut through the stillness like a stone shattering glass. Ruth flinched so hard she nearly stumbled backwards, a sharp gasp tearing from her throat. Then the panic took her. She began to cry, suddenly, fully, as though the sound had snapped the last thread holding her together. I reached for her, tried to pull her back to calm, but her hands were already shaking, her voice fractured. "You have to get the feather," she sobbed, eyes wide and distant, as if she could already see what waited for her in the dark. My mouth opened, then closed again. My feet didn't want to move. "You'll stay here, right here?" I asked, unsure of what else to do. Ruth nodded fast, wiping her nose. I didn't want to go, but I didn't want to stay here any longer. I just wanted to finish this, fast. I stepped carefully across the creek, avoiding the cold water to seep into my sneakers as I hopped from one slick stone to the next. On the other side, the air shifted. It was thinner somehow, laced with a scent that reminded me of crushed flowers and damp moths, earthy and sickening. The clearing opened in front of me like a mouth, pale and quiet. Moonlight filtered through the branches above, just enough to make out the ring of pine cones, undisturbed. Except the feather was gone. My stomach dropped. I stepped closer, scanning the grass, the dirt, the rocks. It wasn't there. Not anywhere. The feather we'd placed in the center had vanished. Then, behind me, a voice, raspy and low. Not yours. I turned sharply, heart in my throat, and then I heard it. Something crashing through the branches, heavy, fast, like someone running away. It came from the direction of the creek. Ruth, she's leaving me. The thought surged through my head. Panic ignited in my chest, and I bolted. I needed to catch her. I can't be alone in here. I reached the edge of the clearing, just in time to see something leap across the creek. But it wasn't Ruth. The shape was too tall, limbs too long, its posture warped. It landed on all fours, then straightened, neck craning unnaturally. A scream started, Ruth's voice high and sharp, but it didn't finish. It cut off mid-breath, like a flame drowned in cold water. Then nothing, no wind, no rustling, just the steady rhythm of the creek. In that stillness, two golden eyes lifted from the far side of the water and locked onto mine. They weren't human. There was no confusion or hesitation in them, just hunger, sharp and clear, and something worse, knowing. Not curiosity, not instinct, recognition. My breath caught. My body didn't move, couldn't. The thing stared through me, and for a second I was certain that if I blinked, I'd never open my eyes again. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the eyes disappeared, folded into the dark like they'd never been there. Something inside me snapped. I lunged forward, crashing into the creek, the shock of cold water barely registering as I stumbled across. I shouted Ruth's name again and again until my throat became raw, eyes straining through the trees, but nothing moved, nothing answered. I reached the other side and stood there, chest heaving, throat burning. The silence pressed in around me until it felt like I was the only thing left alive. I sank to my knees. My hands hit the dirt, and the sobs came fast, spilling out before I could stop them. I don't know how long I stayed like that, curled in the muck with the weight of everything crashing down at once. Time didn't pass. It just sat on me. Eventually, I felt arms around me, bigger, steadier, pulling me up. Someone spoke, but I didn't hear the words. It was the sheriff. He'd found me. The boys had run when they heard the screams. They told someone. A search party had already begun combing the woods. I hadn't thought about Foxfeather in years. Not until this morning, when my daughter asked where she could find a feather. "Why do you want one, sweetheart?" I asked, zipping up her backpack. She smiled and shrugged. "It's for a game," she said. "There's a new girl, Ruth. She wants to play with us tonight."